Good morning, thanks for coming along to my presentation about Australian applications of the Exidy Sorcerer. So I'll talk a little bit about my relationship with the Sorcerer and where it fits into Australian computing history. So the sysadmin for the Sorcerer computer users group in Melbourne, Ian Branch, told me when I interviewed him that for a period of time, if you went to Dick Smith to buy a computer in Australia, they said, this is what you get. And here's an ad from the era, Dick gives you more. So for $1,250 in 1978, you got 16K of RAM. You can look at what floppies cost, $2,000, you know, like I'm sure if you added up a complete disk-based system, you might have been able to buy a car for that at the time. This is some screenshots from a demo that I imagine Exidy must have used at trade shows and provided to their distributors. It was written by Vic Ptolemy, who wound up moving over into the arcade side of Exidy and developed a number of their arcade games. So I got a Sorcerer in about 1982 from my uncle, who had upgraded, I guess, in inverted commas, to a PC. I was looking at getting a Micro B, and I guess my parents spoke to him for some advice, and he said, well, you know, why don't I give Michael my Sorcerer? So I used it for last couple of years of high school as a word processor, and then all through uni doing my thesis and various projects. I had a tape-based word processor, and when I started doing longer, it's like 5,000 word essays, I couldn't fit the whole essay into RAM at once, so I have to write it in two parts. A dot matrix printer that, you know, screamed as I was doing the printout, so I couldn't even be in the dorm room. I've been staying at the Canberra Accommodation Centre, and it's very reminiscent of my uni dorm room. So Exidy here are trying to emphasise the programmable graphics, which is one of the things that sets this machine apart. So keep that in mind as I go through the 5 different applications that I'm going to show. It had high resolution graphics for the period. They thought that would be really good for word processing in foreign languages and doing, you know, technical drawings and that kind of thing. And I think you'll see as I go through that that's actually what they managed to achieve. My talk is also a little bit in response to this kind of idea from modern hobbyists that the Sorcerer wasn't very useful, that it was a failure. If only Exidy had tried a bit harder and put a bit more money into it, then we'd all be using Exidy laptops now. We wouldn't be using IBMs and Apples. And I think that's a mischaracterization. And he, you know, in the second poster here said, you know, the graphics are not very good. You know, like they're an interesting curiosity, but you couldn't do much with them. And I think that's coming from the perspective is that they didn't have colour and they didn't have sound. It was a business machine. So to look at it from the point of view, trying to compare it to something that was great for games, I don't think is reasonable. And I know the person now who made that quote, and he's actually developed some Sorcerer resources, so he might have the same view now that it wasn't very useful, but I think I'll show that it was. In 1979, a guy called Joseph Power wrote a game for the Sorcerer called Wizard's Castle, and he made these remarks about the graphics. And this is what people were sort of thinking at the time. So again, the idea of the programmable high-resolution graphics, I think, is an important factor. Joseph Power wrote a game, wrote Wizard's Castle, and then that got ported to a number of other platforms. But the first case study I want to show is a multimedia training application that was developed by Dr. Graham Parslow for use in South Australia for biochemistry training. And I've got about 160 discs from Graham that I'm slowly imaging. They're hard sector, 10 sector discs, so quite an obscure format for a disk controller called Vista, which is a little bit like North Star, but not close enough that you can use North Star tooling to extract the software. Here's the gratuitous Microcomputing in Education magazine cover from Killerboard with the student chatting up someone while he casually hangs on to his Sorcerer. I wouldn't carry a Sorcerer around like that. She's got the cassette deck and some textbooks, and it's great. Got the clogs on, he's got his cowboy boots, and 1978. It was it's a lovely image. So Graham actually wrote an article a journal article in 1984 in a journal called Biochemical Education, talking about what they were doing over at the University of Adelaide with their 4 sorcerers. So at one time they were using tape plus slides for training students in biochem, and then they moved on to a program called Q that he wrote for the sorcerer, which could present propositions using the sorcerer programmable graphics, and asked that the students could answer yes or no, or they could do multiple choice, or they could also do free text entry. Here's another example showing various kind of molecules. And here the sorcerer's graphics are being used to plot data from student experiments. So an educational application, a great application, and I haven't been able to recover Q yet. I have a cpm.com file, but I also have to reconstruct the environment in which it ran to be able to get the software to turn over, and I haven't got there yet. And then I'll need to recover some banks of propositions, and then I might probably need to get the custom graphics as well, which are in another format. So if I can get all that together, then it'll be great to be able to run it and have the journal article from 1984, which shows that this software existed and what the rationale for it was and how it was used and whether it was successful, running side by side with the actual program. I think that'd be a wonderful thing to achieve. What I have found so far on the few discs I've imaged, though, is some of the usual sorcerer games, which I was demonstrating yesterday, like the kids were really liking Chomp, which is a sorcerer Pac-Man, and Galaxians and so forth. But I saw this file called Driver 2, and I thought, well, this is going to be a printer driver. There's a lot of print stuff on these discs. But it actually turns out to be a program by Colin Keay from Newcastle called Crazy Drive, which, as far as I know, hasn't been recovered before. You can see that you could buy Crazy Drive from Global Software Network, so here's the ad for it, an adventure game with graphics. If you like exploring strange towns by car, and who doesn't, this one is for you. You have a choice of 70,000 Crazyvilles to visit, each having a different street plan, written in assembler, $15.95 for the cassette. Global Software Network had a bunch of distributors, so you could get it from Creative Software in Melbourne or Customised Technology in Ashfield in Sydney.
The original Elite was essentially procedurally generated.
Yep.
To do 70,000 commercials, it would have to be the same.
Yeah.
I think that's 4 or 5 years before.
So that is how it works. You tell the game how many columns and rows of streets that you want. So this is where's McTucky's. You're approaching a highway signboard, and so I haven't played it through. So it claims to use graphics. So I don't know to what extent it does, but these little little successes, I suppose, is what keeps you going. You get this little endorphin hit. I've found this program now. Colin Keay. I hope he's still out there. Haven't managed to track him down, but his software will live on in perpetuity once we put it into projects like MAME and put it up on various source repositories online. So back to so Graham said that writing Q for the sorcerer defined his career, and he had to, when the sorcerer became obsolete, they ported it across to the PC, and it was actually made available as a commercial package used in different universities. So as I've said, I'd love to get it going, but there's a lot of work to image the mouldy discs, to put them through a cryoflux, then to extract the actual files using CPM tools, and then reconstruct the actual environment, and then learn to drive the software. So it's by no means trivial. The second application I found out about when I interviewed a number of people from the Sorcerer user group in Sydney. I was reading old newsletters and I came across an ad for what they called the Sorcerer user group live in. And I thought, you know, what was that? And they would turn up at a university campus on Friday night, bring all their gear, set it all up on trestle tables, much like we're doing over the weekend here, and hack on their machines, demonstrate hardware and software, play network games, eat pizza, stay up for 48 hours. And I thought, that's amazing. I need to find out more about that. You Google it, you don't find anything. So I did a bunch of oral histories with those people, and I also contrasted what they were doing here in Australia with what was happening in the Netherlands, which is the other country where the Sorcerer was big. There they had Sorcerer Dagen, which is Sorcerer Days, and they would get up to 3,000 people who'd come along to a soccer stadium or an ice rink and just talk, communicate, see presentations, see demos. Some of the people I interviewed told me that as soon as they got in the front door, they were swamped by 5 deep people and didn't even get to go to the toilet or have a drink of water all day because there was such a demand for information about what to do with computers when they first arrived into people's homes in the late 70s. So in the Sorcerer user group in Sydney was a guy called Steve Spain, and he developed a 3D engraving machine that was controlled by the Sorcerer. So we know that it was demonstrated in 1982, and I presume here it was just done as a proof of concept. You know, wouldn't it be cool to see if we can use a Sorcerer to control things? And the other theme I think to keep in mind with the Sorcerer, in addition to the programmable graphics, is all the I/O ports that were available for people to connect it to things. So I haven't been able to find Steve. You would think you could find someone called Steve Spain pretty easily, but these folks, if they were in their 30s or 40s when they bought a Sorcerer in the late 70s, and they're getting pretty old now if they're even still around, and they sort of have that generation that didn't really leave a digital footprint. You know, they probably missed out on having Facebook profiles or things like that. So I'd love to find a photo of the machine. I'd love to find, of course, the software and be able to demonstrate it. But what I did find in my research in the Netherlands from the user group over there is they had demonstrated an XY plotter, which you can see down here, and obviously a fantastic photo. And on the sheet up at the top right, as a bit of an aside, you can see in this other photo what software that you could get. They were making compilation tapes, so they had 3 compilation tapes at the time, which were 750, I think, for the first 3 tapes. Now, you probably want to know, have these tapes survived? Could we run this software today that's in this photo? Well, at the Home Computer Museum in Helmond in the Netherlands, they do have a bunch of ESGG cassettes, but the first one I think's 3, but last year in France, some of the earlier ones turned up. So this is tape 2, which you can see in the photo. So I've got a WAV file of this. I've been able to recover most of the files. So it's wonderful to have the physical evidence that the user group were producing these compilations, and then against that you can actually see what was on the tape running interactively in an emulator on a real Sorcerer. So very satisfying to be able to do that. So while I don't know what Steve's engraver looked like, I do have examples of the output, and everybody I spoke to who remembers seeing this thing says it was a joy to watch. Like, it was an amazing machine, accurate to 1/40th of a millimetre. So I don't have the machine, but I do have examples of what it could do. So here's some name tags that it made for Martin Webster, who was one of the members of the group. And the details there, I think the idea that it was accurate to 1/40th of a millimetre is feasible, because it's really nice. And this also tells us that this Sorcerer user group turned up at PC85 in Sydney and had a little stand. And I wagged a day of school in Year 12 in 1984 and went to PC84 in Melbourne. So I can sort of connect to that. And this is interesting what happened with Steve. Again, it's a little bit like Dr. Graham Parslow. The Sorcerer became obsolete. He had to move on to the IBM, and this is the same thing that happened with Steve. It's told to me by one of the participants in my study. So yeah, just move to a PC, because then, who cares? Just get another one. So a lovely little anecdote. The third application is from Rafi Chamay, who was also a member of the Sorcerer user group in Sydney. And I interviewed Rafi, and I think I'll just let him speak for himself with this little anecdote.
So I had money burning in my pocket.
Right.
And I'd always had a technical bent. I could have been an engineer just as easily as I could have been an accountant.
Yeah.
But my family were a family of accountants, so guess what happened?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I sort of had, all these dollars in the pocket, and I frequented Dick Smith Electronics, my favourite store. Built a few of the things, but I saw this thing called an Exidy Sorcerer, and I thought, wow, that'd be great. And in order to justify it, I sort of said, well, went up to the salesman, and I sort of said, look, can it do accounting? In blind ignorance. And the guy said, yes, of course it can do accounting, and failed to tell me that I had to write the software because there was none.
So, yeah, it can do accounting. So he gets at home, has to write the software. Now, the thing is that he did, and people did write software. That's what you did with computers. There was really very little off-the-shelf software, particularly accounting software. So Rafi and a helper wrote the software, and when he told me this, I said, so hang on, and he couldn't afford a disk system, so he still had a cassette system, which is what I had. So I said, so you had a cassette for every one of your accounting clients? And he said, no, not only one cassette per client, I had one cassette per client for every financial year. So you can imagine these rows of cassettes. So quite quickly he moved his program, which he called Ledger Z, because I think it was written in Z Basic, onto the disk system. But it's an example of the sort of ingenuity. People had to solve the problem themselves. So I guess this is what drew him into the shop. And the Sorcerer there is still, well, it's gone up to $13.95, but you get 32K memory now. So that's good. And you can see the word processor pack, $279. The development pack, so here's a development pack, so that was $139. So that's an assembler. So the next application is a really interesting scientific application that I stumbled across looking at a SETI forum, which is Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and someone just made an offhand remark that they knew someone who had had a sorcerer in Antarctica. So I'm like, what? So I spent about 6 months tracking down Dr. Ivan Reid, who went to the Mawson base in Antarctica and took a sorcerer. So this was the setup. So he had a 32K sorcerer, so I guess it might have been a Mark I sorcerer, S100 expansion unit, which I've got on my table here this weekend. Another 32K of memory on a S100 memory card. He had the Electronics Australia video board. And the software he was using for this application, Basic, Word Processor, CVM, and Microsoft's Compile Basic. And what he was hooking up to was a Fabry-Perot interferometer. And that had 4 National Semi SCMP processors, and I saw some SCAMP kits getting demonstrated yesterday. So it was doing data acquisition, CRT display and plotting, cassette output, and general purpose I/O. So this is the test equipment. So this was in what Dr. Reid called the Aurora hut, which is, I believe, this building here from this modern photo. So it's still there. So I asked the Australian Antarctic Division if they had any photos of the Aurora hut, and they couldn't find any. But this is a shot from Australian and New Zealand physicists of the periscope on the roof, which is how the instrument sees the atmosphere. And I then contacted some other people who'd been at Mawson in that era, and they said, well, we also called it the aeronomy building. So then I went back to the librarian at the Australian Antarctic Division, and she had another search, and she found this beautiful photo of the roof of the aeronomy building, again with the periscope, which captures light of specific wavelengths and allows auroral studies, upper atmosphere research. I'm not an expert on it. I would love to find a photo of the Sorcerer down there, but I do believe that this is a photo of the equipment that they were using, a couple of the scientists down there. So presumably somewhere in this building there's lurking a Sorcerer. So all I want is a black and white photo of a heavily bearded man in a woolly jumper crouched over a Sorcerer at the Mawson base in 1980. Am I reaching for the stars? No. I mean, that would make my day. So I don't have that, but what I do have is a photo of the custom S100 circuit board that they made to take down there. So, and it gets better. So this is the other side, right? So it's custom wire wrapped, and that was in the S100 expansion unit. And what that was able to do was intercept the data coming from the instrument that would normally be going to a digital cassette deck. So it was created to be compatible with that data stream. So I was able to acquire the data from the instrument, and then he had programs that could parse that data and come up with the results. So I've shown that scientific application, commercial applications like accounting, a business application with the engraver. The final one I want to show is none of those things. It's just like a completely one-off piece of software that somebody wrote for their own entertainment, which is a problem that they wanted to solve. Now, I found out about Jim because he put a YouTube clip up of his Sorcerer years ago, and I actually went down to see him in 2019 because he had the last known Sorcerer with a dream disk controller. So this is a dream disk controller developed by Rick Collett, and for the Micro B, and if you had an adapter cable that changed the pinouts, you could connect it to a Sorcerer. And I wanted to preserve that because, again, going back to this idea, the Sorcerer wasn't very useful, wasn't very successful in America, but you know, it was successful here in Australia and the Netherlands. And this is a great example of how users continue to develop the platform even into the late 80s, when you could connect a hard disk. So it was so Jim still had a Sorcerer with the power on monitor BIOS ROMs in it. So I went down there and I was able to send those out the serial port through an adapter that I made to USB into my Mac. So I was able to capture the BIOS as a text file and also image the CPM master disk for that system. And it's been emulated in the MAME emulator now since 2019. And then last year, Marcel Ers, who does a lot of work with recreating TRS-80 circuit boards and so forth, made a modern reproduction of the Dream Disk controller, which is open sourced. So now anyone who's got a Sorcerer and doesn't want to have to load stuff up off cassette can run a Dream Disk because of the disk image and the ROMs and, you know, the physical hardware. So I've been demonstrating my Sorcerer with disks this year. Last year I was on cassette, so people come along and want to see something and go, well, hang on, come back in 15 minutes. And they've already left. So it's been really great to have people come up, and if they're kids, I can play games, but if they're into music, I can show some music stuff, or and I've even shown Bright for people as well, because they were really interested in what people did with computers back then and fascinated by this idea that we've lost touch with the hardware and software, and now we just use apps and we don't really know how technology works anymore. So this is what Bright looks like. This is running in the MAME emulator. So it's for control of Jim's model train layout. So you can see, I don't know if there's any model train buffs here. I'm not, but you know, these are the tracks, and then you have points that can be switched so that the train can go in different directions, and these are signals. So I was running this in MAME, and I was trying to set a route. So I want my train to go along route A or something like that. And I kept getting this error saying route not set. And I called Jim and I said, mate, how do I use it? Like, it won't set the route. And he goes, oh yeah, it started happening for me as well about 20 years ago. So sometimes the emulated environment, recapitulates the real hardware. But I started thinking about it, and what it must be doing is it tells the train layout how to configure itself so the train can go from the origin to the destination route. And because the hardware's not connected, when it interrogates the layout to make sure that it's correct, it's not getting the feedback that it wants. So it's saying the route's not set. So I thought, well, can I trick it into thinking the route is set so I can at least see the graphics change? So I hooked the parallel port up to the logic analyzer, and I can see that the 3 least significant bits on the Sorcerer's 8-bit parallel port are being written to all the time. So I guess 3, so it's writing, so it's sort of multiplexing or selecting up to 8 banks of relays. I know he had 24 inputs and 24 outputs. So by poking wires into the parallel port, I have been able to get it to change. So you can see that this signal U12 goes on and then off, and also in this region of the layout you can see the switching happening so the train can go in different directions. So pretty cool. And then I was also able to get it to show this, and then when you try and set a route, it says error route not free, which is really cool because you don't actually want to send your train down a track that's got a train on it. So I really wanted to get photos of the layout. Jim's 80, right? So you have to handle people, really patiently and gently. But I was demonstrating this yesterday on the machine because it was a good illustration of what people were doing back then. So I sent him this photo to say, look, it's tomorrow, my presentation, what do you reckon? Do you think you could get me a shot? So he did email me last night. So you can see the actual physical layout, and if you look carefully, you can even see his Sorcerer lurking in the corner there. So, it'll be a huge amount of work, but it'll be wonderful to come here one year and have his software and a little model train layout, maybe connect with a local Canberra model train club or something, and it'll be wonderful to be able to demonstrate that. And that was part of what came up in my research. I sort of was surprised how passionate people were about trying to interface things to their computers back then. They didn't just want to write software, they wanted to do practical things. Yeah. And I wasn't expecting to find that, but it was one of the sort of conclusions that I drew at the end of my my thesis. And while I was in Europe last year, I went to the Home Computer Museum in Helmond, where they have a Sorcerer set up with an S100 expansion unit. So here's a little photo to finish on with me having far too good a time. Yeah. So yeah, they've recreated the the 70s aesthetic. Yeah, and they've actually got the box there, and it looks like it's got straps printed on it like a little suitcase. And Exidy's marketing material, like their books, use this motif of going on a journey with this cartoon wizard with his wizard hat and his Hawaiian shirt, and you're going on a journey and you're learning about computing and making it really exciting. And in the catalogue entry, the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney has a Sorcerer, and in their catalogue entry for it, they talk about how the packaging it's designed to look like a suitcase, and it's not very convincing. I think, yeah. I do have a Sorcerer hat, actually. Yeah. So I think they missed the point there with the playfulness of it all. Yeah. So wondering if anyone has any questions for me.
I think that train layout you're talking about being fantastically popular.
Yeah.
Really,
I think interactive things are good, you know. So yeah, you could make a little layout, and you know, do it as a collab with a model train club.
There's some really tiny, I mean, I know nothing about trains. I actually know nothing about the Sorcerer, to be honest, too. But was always fascinated by the ads.
Yeah.
But you can get some really tiny gauge trains, so you could put a portable, you know, like they talk about suitcase sort of style layouts. You could put something together.
you might start a whole war, I think, against not the Amiga and could blow up.
Yeah, I mean, he was able to do this because of, you know, you have your parallel port and it's got good, it's buffered and latched, so the I/O lines are not just connected directly to the processor.
We've actually got a graphics card. I designed it for the Sorcerer at home. And so a bitmap graphics card.
Yeah, fantastic.
The video timing circuitry in the Sorcerer is quite elegant, actually. And the whole programmable character generator used to do my editing. So I basically just ripped off the video timing circuitry and just used, 16K static RAM.
Wow.
And all the wire wrapped.
Yep, so it was fully bitmapped.
Yeah, like 5 kilo by 256.
Mm-hmm.
So this one,
No, just like straight into the back.
Wow. Yeah, that's fantastic.
So it's, just for shits and giggles.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of the most popular games for the micro:b originated on the Sorcerer, and the micro:b's programmable graphics are compatible. Things like Defender and Chomp and that were ported across by System Software in Perth and were really popular on the B.
The other thing I had for a Sorcerer, which I wish I still had because I think they're pretty rare nowadays, was a thing called a stringy floppy. Stringy floppy, yeah. It's like a little tape about the size of a credit card, but a little bit thicker.
Like the ones in the Sinclair QL.
Yeah,
It's like a single loop, like they track together.
Yeah.
Micro drive, that was what
Absolutely. And you could get, you could store more, but it would take more for you to go around the loop. Yeah. And because having that S100 expansion unit and the microcomputers drives, like you had to be a millionaire. Like it's like luxury.
Yeah, the stringy floppy, the Exitron stringy floppy was converted for the Sorcerer by a Melbourne company called ASP Microcomputers. And I have the custom BIOS for the stringy floppy for the Sorcerer, and I have a ROM dump from the drive itself, and it is partially emulated in MAME. Like you can boot to the point where it is looking for a wafer. So that's cool. And I've got some wafers, but Terry Stewart in New Zealand, Tezza, who has a really great Sorcerer page with all the software on it, he tried to recover stringy floppy wafers and he was finding that they were breaking when he tried to read them. And my theory is that because it's a, how did you describe it, like an 8-track, it's a continuous loop. Yeah. So if you think about it, all the tape layers have to sort of shear past each other a tiny amount as it winds around, as it peels it off. And I think what's happening is the tape is breaking down and it's getting sticky, and so it can't move past each layer can't slide past each other enough as it's playing.
Joiner, and that was it knew that's where the tape started.
Like a start tape marker.
Yeah. Which you could physically see, that little thing in the tape.
Yeah, so they break.
You'd almost want to
slice it,
unpacking it into just a large loop, just to play it through one last time.
That's what I'm thinking of doing. It's just a matter of time.
Because you can picture inside the package, it must be constantly just rubbing against itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got some stringy floppy wafers, and I'd love to just recover the utilities and stuff, so that then in MAME you could format a wafer and write some software to it. That'd be really cool. So that's my presentation. Appreciate it.